From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. I'm Jason Tenori, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo! Dr. Jason here, Dental Lighthouse Podcast. It is Thursday, October 30th, the day before Halloween. And it is dreary outside. It is pouring cats and dogs, which really sucks because I need to get some more steps in and I don't want to do it on my treadmill. So I'm going to have to bundle up and get out there. But I digress. Today, I want to talk to you guys about something that we unpacked last week on our group coaching call, which really landed well with a lot of people. But I could also tell that there was a little bit of misunderstanding because I had a bunch of my coaching clients reach out for additional clarity afterwards. And it's the concept of getting ready for 2026 and strategically planning like we are astute business owners and planning what we expect to do in terms of revenue and what we expect to do in terms of profitability. And I'm not going to be able to go down, a 2 or 3 mile rabbit hole and get into the nitty gritty, but I definitely feel like I can, over the next 20 minutes or so, give you guys some things to really be thinking about, if you're not already doing that, to make sure that you're better prepared for what 2026 is going to look like. And now's the time to do it. It's not that last week of December where you have a few days off and you've had a second or third Manhattan and you break out a notebook while there's football on TV and you try to hash out some goals. That's not the time. The time is now. So what I'd like to do is just break this up into two parts. It'll be in one episode, but two parts. First is revenue. Second is profitability. So let's talk about revenue first. We all, and everything that I'm saying, I'm guilty of, right? So I am qualified to talk about mistakes because I've made them all. So early in my career, I would set these revenue goals or these growth goals and really have absolutely no clarity with how I'm going to attain them, right? So a goal might be, we're going to grow 10% every year, which is awesome, right? If you can grow 10% every year, then more power to you. But the question really becomes, how are you going to grow 10%? So what I want you to think about from a tactical and granular perspective is, what is each of your clinical providers, your other associate doctors, if you have any, and your hygienists, and perhaps if you have EFTAs and stuff like that. We don't have those in my practice, but whatever providers are bringing in revenue. In my opinion, you really need to have clarity on what each of those providers is producing on a daily or hourly basis. We like to break it up into hours, but you can use either hours or days. So what are they typically producing on an hourly basis? And then you take that number and then you extrapolate it over how many projected hours you expect them to work in the future. So from my perspective, what we do, and I'm sure there's other ways to do this, but I can only communicate to you what's worked successfully for us, is we would go back and look at the last 3 months, or you could even look at year to date, right? Today is October 30th, 2025. So I would encourage you to go back and look at the last 3 months, the last 6 months, or year to date. It doesn't really matter because you're going to divide it by the amount of hours or days that you've worked. So let's take you, most likely listening to this as the founding doctor, right? What have you produced over the last 3 months? How many days or hours did you work? And you do some simple math and you figure out, okay, I'm producing $5,000 a day or $800 an hour or whatever it is. You take that number and you add 5%. So if it's $5,000, what's 5% of 5,000? 500 is 10%. So it's 250 bucks. So you add 5% and then you look at the first quarter of 2026 and you say, okay, I'm going to work 40 days in the first quarter, or I'm going to work X amount of hours in the first quarter. And you take into account your vacation time and holidays and stuff like that. And you know, with pretty good precision, what revenue you are going to be able to generate in the first quarter or the first half or the whole, you can extrapolate it out over the whole year. And then you do that with your associate doc, and then you do it with your hygienist. And, you know, we are blessed to have a number of hygienists. They're all amazing people. Some are more productive than others, but in an effort to keep the math simple, we traditionally would go, we would average out the number of average out the average amount for per hygienist. You could say, I don't know, $1,500 a day. You could say, um, you could do it by hour. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is that you do it, right? So again, let's just create a fictitious example. Let's say you're one doctor and you have two hygienists, and you're doing 5 grand a day, and your two hygienists are doing $1,500 a day. That's $8,000 a day, right? Let's say you work 4 days a week. You're going to take that information, you're going to add 5% to that daily amount, and you're going to extrapolate it over however many days you're working in the first quarter, the first half of the year, the whole year, what have you. Now, why 5%? A couple things. Doing dentistry is a skill, right? And I don't mean just the hands-on part of it. I mean the ability to communicate. I mean the ability to empathetically listen to patients. I mean the ability to present needed treatment with more and more confidence than you did a year ago. So just these little micro wins should easily extrapolate to 5% increase. So just by going through the motions, possibly a fee schedule increase, just by going through the motions and doing what you've always done and learning from your mistakes and tweaking the system and micro wins, you should be able to increase the revenue from you and your other providers at a minimum 5%. So when you do that, you have absolute clarity with what you are most likely going to produce or bring in from a revenue perspective in the first quarter of 2026. Now, if you had set these ambitious goals of 10% growth, 15% growth, 20% growth, like that's awesome. And I am so excited that you think along those lines. But what I find happens more often than not is owners kind of set these unrealistic goals, but don't have a really tactical way to get there, right? So it's one thing to say, we're going to grow 20% year over year. But if you're going to keep doing what you've always been doing, you're not going to get there. You're only going to grow 5, 6, 7%. So if your ambitions are higher, love it, but make sure that you're tactically and strategically doing things that are going to allow you to get to that 20%. So what are some of those things? It could be adding a hygienist. It could be adding a part-time associate. It could be adding a specialist. It could be expanding your skill set. It could be creating a renewed emphasis on periodontal disease in your hygiene department. There's a million ways to do it. I just don't want you to have this ambition of 15 or 20% growth year over year when you don't have a strategy to backfill that ambition. I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm explaining that clearly enough. So again, let's just recap, and let's just look at the first quarter of 2026 just to keep it simple. So assuming that you're not going to bring on any providers, assuming it's you and a couple of hygienists, what did you do either this year or over the last quarter? Figure it out on an hourly basis or figure it out on a daily basis. Add 5%. And then looking ahead at the first quarter, how many hours or how many days are all of you guys going to work? And you can set up a simple spreadsheet and it will spit out a number. And that's the projected revenue for the first quarter. Now that you have that, we can start to look at the expense side. So just to keep the math simple, let's say that the first quarter, we did all of those numbers, and the first quarter was $500,000, right? That's what we figured out. That's how much revenue I expect to bring in based on historical data and based on the fact that we're going to grow. The two hygienists and this one doctor are going to grow 5%. And again, without doing anything else, the 5% comes from either a slight fee increase, but more likely comes from the fact that you are sharpening your saw. You are enhancing your skill at not only doing clinical dentistry, but having the conversations with patients, refining the systems, getting a few more people to say yes, becoming more efficient with your time, so on and so forth. Those micro wins, assuming everything else stays the same, should easily add to 5% increase in revenue. At least it's been our experience for the last 15 years organizationally, that 5% growth at a minimum without changing anything else routinely happens. Perfect. So now we know we're going to do $500,000 in the first quarter of 2026. That's half of the equation. The other half of the equation is, what are we going to spend money on? And without going into the weeds on all of the things that we spend money on, wages, dental supplies, lab supplies, facility, office supplies, marketing, you need to have clarity with where this $500,000 is going. Okay, so we know we're bringing in $500,000. Now you need to assign categories for each of those dollars, right? Now, how do you do that? Well, one way you can do it is get on ChatGPT and be like, what are the typical budgetary percentages for a dental office? And I say that facetiously because that's who I used to be, right? You would go to the ADA website or you'd find some blog and you would be like, whoa, it looks like I'm supposed to spend 25% on staff wages. And looks like I'm supposed to spend 6% on lab bills. And looks like I'm supposed to spend, dot, dot, dot. And if you're a new practice owner, maybe that's a strategy that could work for you, but it's not, in my opinion, the right strategy. It's not the strategy that I coach on. When you set yourself up, for that strategy, in my opinion, you're setting yourself up for failure. So what I would encourage you to do is, again, look at historical data and fight like hell to be better. So what do I mean by that? Well, what have you spent 2025 year to date on staff wages? Let's assume it's 30%. Now, is 30% good or bad? I don't know. It depends on the rest of the story. And we're telling a story here. 30% might be considered high by some people, but perhaps you're in a market where you want to be overstaffed. Perhaps you're in a market where you have a lot of turnover. Perhaps you're in a market where people get paid an exceptionally high amount of money. I mean, I have coaching clients on the West Coast that pay hygienists almost $100 an hour. Simple supply and demand, and no judgment, but that's what it is. So you can't compare yourself to everyone else. You need to compare yourself to who you were a year ago, or who you were a quarter ago, or who you were yesterday, to be quite honest with you. But I digress. So what you need to do is look at your year to date or your historical data. And if you've spent 30% on wages, then my goal for the first quarter would be less than that. At the very least that, but ideally 29%. And then you would go through each one of your categories and ultimately say, okay, this is where we were at. Am I happy with this percentage? Is it in line with what I think is appropriate? And then you make a decision based on every single line item of your profit and loss statement. So if your dental supply bill is at 6%, and you love your lab and you feel you're paying a fair fee and deliveries are falling right into place, then don't change that. But an overarching thing that you need to be thinking about is, what is your overall profitability? So again, you could get on the ADA website, you could look at ChatGPT, and it is what it is. But I need you to understand what your current profitability is. Now, there's two ways to look at profitability. There's the way I believe in it, and then there's the way some of you other people believe in it. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I'll just unpack this. I personally believe that if you're running a business, you don't just have a good job, you're running a business, then you as the provider, you as a clinician need to be considered an employee of the practice. You basically wear two hats. You wear the owner hat and you wear the clinician hat. You need to get paid as a clinician and as an owner. Now, if that's confusing to you, reach out to me and we can unpack it. But in my organization, I want myself as a clinician, and I teach my coaching clients to treat themselves as a clinician. And that's how we calculate overhead. So a good overhead, in the way I look at it, is 80%. So after you get paid as a clinician, ideally we want about 20% profitability left over. Now, if you don't want to think of it that way, if you want to look at it the old school way, then it should be closer to 50 or 55% overhead. Basically, the only difference with those two metrics is you're taking your own pay out of the equation. So do it however you want to do it. I'm just trying to communicate to you that the way I coach doing it, the way I encourage you to do it, in an effort to think like a business owner, you should be taking your wages as a clinician and incorporating that into overhead. So many reasons why to do that we can unpack on another podcast. But anyways, it doesn't matter. So if using my system, you want a profitability goal to be 20%, or using the archaic, outdated system, you want your profitability to say be 55%. Those are the two ways to do it. What was your profitability in 2025? What was your profitability in 2024? Look at trends. Where am I at? If you're currently running profitability at, say, 10%, which is common, unfortunately, then you having a 2026 goal of 20% profitability because you listen to this podcast makes no sense. You're setting yourself up for failure. You're basically saying, I am going to have 100% increase on my profitability. I'm going to go from 10% profitability to 20. Not going to happen, right? Unless there's mass chaos and you make a ton of drastic changes, which I'm not encouraging you to do. So when you're setting your goals, figure out, okay, what was my profitability in 2025? Or what was my year-to-date profitability? Or what was my trailing 12-month profitability? Let's assume it was 15%. Awesome. That's data. It's not good or bad. It's just data. Now we know. So with that information, I can say, okay, I want my first quarter 2026 profitability to be 17%. That's a 2% increase, 15 to 17%, right? That's a very realistic goal. That's what I would call a stretch goal. Attainable. It's going to stretch you. You're going to have to make some tough decisions, but realistic. So we're talking about a 2% discrepancy here, from 15% to 17%. Now you have to ask yourself, if I'm going to try to gain 2% profitability in the first quarter, where's that going to come from? And again, you go back and you look at every line item from a budgetary perspective. What are you going to spend on wages? What are you going to spend on dental supplies? What are you going to spend on office supplies? What are you going to spend on facility? What are you going to spend on marketing? All of these things. What are you going to spend on quote unquote other expenses, right? And you're going to have to figure out, where am I going to find 2%? And that's the math. That's how it works. And then it's just a matter of making sure you fight like hell at the end of every week or at the end of every month to look at this data. And again, like a scientist, not beating yourself up, you say, that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that. What changes do I need to make to be more in line with what I set out to do? So super, how do I want to phrase this? Simple, just not easy, right? But I would encourage you that the hardest part is locking yourself in a room for an hour with all of the information you need and figuring this out. It's super important. And if you don't do this, you don't really have clarity with where you are and where you're going. In this week's newsletter, we have a Dental Lighthouse newsletter. If you're not, is it subscribed? Is that the word I'm looking for? If you don't get it, go to our website and sign up. But I talk a lot about how this past Monday, I I did a deep dive on a practice that we're considering purchasing in Rochester. I spent hours and hours poring over P&Ls and cash flow statements and budgetary line items and, how I can raise EBITDA in this practice and stuff like that. And I leave no stone unturned. And I've developed that habit over time. But in the blog I wrote this week for the newsletter, I talk a lot about why don't we take that level of efficiency, that level of work, that level of determination into our home finances. And I think the main reason we don't, or the main reason I used to not, was because we get complacent. We make a decent amount of money as dentists, and it's not an issue, right? Like, and what happens is subscriptions continue to roll that we don't use, and investments continue to not get funded because we forget to renew them, or whatever it is. But as soon as you start to get a little bit more serious about it at home finances, or in this particular situation with what you're going to do next year in your dental practice, as soon as we start to take an increased level of tenacity and awareness to these numbers, by default, you'll automatically do better. It's like when I coach clients to start using a weekly scorecard. A lot of times I'll start one-on-one coaching relationships and I'll bring it up, every week for the first 4 or 5 weeks. And, it's hard for people to change. So they're like, oh yeah, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. And then we always start up my one-on-one coaching calls with, okay, what fires do we need to put out from the week before? And often it'll be new patient numbers or my production's down or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, how has it been trending? Is this a one-time instance, or what have we? And they're like, well, I don't know. Right. And that's where a scorecard comes in. As soon as you start to pay attention to things, they automatically improve. It's almost like gravity. It's one of those laws. So again, I'm kind of gone off on a tangent here talking about the email newsletter and scorecards. But my point is, put in the work on paying more attention to both top line revenue and budgetary numbers for 2026, at a minimum the first quarter. And I can promise you, and you hold me to this, I can promise you that you will instantly see improvement in those numbers. And at the very least, you'll be able to start asking yourself questions and say to yourself, why is that? Why did I plan for this, but that is actually what happened? And you'll start to peel back the onion and start to realize what little micro changes you need to make in an effort to get to where you want to go. So hope this lands well. Hope this helps. Again, I'm encouraging you to maybe change some habits if you're not already doing this. If you want some more detailed help with this, don't hesitate to reach out. We can set up a discovery call. I can get you on the podcast and answer your questions for the rest of our listeners. I'll do whatever I can to full time, collapse time for you to help you get to where you want to get to sooner than you would have gotten there by yourself. So, all right, guys. One final thing. Again, I've said this before, just in an effort to get this content in front of more people. If you have a minute, I'd love for you guys to go to wherever you listen to this podcast. If you feel it's good content, please give me 5 stars. Please share the episodes with other people. Really try to only bring you relevant content that I think is going to help you a lot in the short term. It's real stuff. It's lessons from all of the mistakes that I've made as a business owner for almost 25 years. So in an effort to say thank you to me, if you feel like this is landing well, if you feel like you're using it, I would so love for you to leave us a 5-star review and share episodes with whoever you feel needs to hear it. So thanks again, guys. Love you. Talk to you soon. Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tenori, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.